Good morning, all, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Good morning in where I am in Vienna, and good afternoon, I suppose, to those joining from Greece. Media freedom in Greece has experienced a clear period of deterioration in the last few years, and in 2023 and 2022 was the lowest ranked country for media freedom in the EU in the World Press Freedom Index. Many of our organizations have been warning about this decline for many years now and pointing out a number of kind of crucial factors behind this, including the murder of a crime reporter, threats to journalists from a spyware scandal, slaps and lawsuits against the press, and then a range of underlying systemic issues as well. So today, our organizations, many of them joined here, will launch a report on examining these key issues in media freedom in Greece. This follows a mission that we did to Athens in September 2023, and it also follows an online mission we did during the pandemic in 2021. During that trip, we met with journalists, editors, experts, academics, civil society, but also state authorities like the government's task force, which included representatives from police and judicial authorities, and also the government's General Secretariat for Communication and Information. We held a press conference when we were in Athens at the offices of the Union of Athens daily newspapers. But today we follow up on that mission with the publication of the report, and we're joined by a number of speakers to go into the details and examine the report and its key findings in a little bit more depth. So I'm Jamie Wiseman, the Europe Advocacy Officer at the International Press Institute, and I'm joined today by our panelists, Pavol Szalai from Reporters Without Borders, Jasmijn de Zeeuw, a legal officer at Free Press Unlimited, Attila Mong, the Europe representative at the Committee to Protect Journalists, Massimo Morratti, who is an expert in the Balkans and Southeast Europe at the Osservatorio Balcani, Caucaso Transeuropa, and we're also joined by Thodoris Chondrogiannos from the independent and investigative media Reporters United. And I should just say as well, that during the mission, we were joined by representatives from Article 19, the European Federation of Journalists, and the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom. So we have around 1 hour for this webinar. We appreciate everyone joining. We'll move first to some of the key findings and conclusions of the report. We'll have some interventions from external journalists, and then hopefully we'll have around 15 minutes at the end for a kind of a Q&A or press conference. So one of the key findings and issues we looked at during the mission was, of course, spyware surveillance, which became a huge issue through the so-called Greek Watergate scandal, which broke in 2021 and 2 and has just kept rolling ever since then. So I'll pass first to Pavol Szalai from Reporters Without Borders. Pavol, what were the main conclusions that the mission report made on that important topic? Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, everyone from Paris. It's a pleasure to speak in this webinar. I first like to thank MFRR and CPJ for the cooperation on this mission and the report, and I would especially like to thank Jamie for the great work. I will start by saying that some subjects in Greece are blacklisted. These are issues of Greek and European public interest, and yet reporters have strong difficulties in covering them, which is dangerous for the citizens' right to information. And this is directly related to surveillance. So these subjects are migration, tax fraud and economic crimes, and the actual use of spyware. So the journalists who were covering and investigating these issues were actually targeted with surveillance. And one of the reasons was to reveal their sources, the confidentiality of sources being absolutely key in their capacity to investigate and cover these issues. So, in fact, the secrecy of journalistic sources is not guaranteed in Greece. That's what we know from the spyware scandal. However, it's the cornerstone of press freedom according to the European Court of Human Rights. And I want to share here the good news about the very recent decision of the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled that the complaint, the appeal of Thanasis Koukakis, who will speak later in the webinar, and I'm sure he will develop that, ruled that his appeal is admissible. So it's an appeal for his surveillance by the National Intelligence Service on grounds of national security in 2020. So indeed, the national authorities in Greece have been failing to secure justice and protect journalists against arbitrary surveillance. Why do I say this? The Greek state says that spyware surveillance is illegal, but has been unable to sanction it. It's only thanks to investigative reporters that we know that the state is actually accomplice in the surveillance of journalists. The National Intelligence Service, we know that, used Predator. The service and the Predator surveillance were complementary in the case of certain targets. And moreover, there are business connections between the company Intellexa commercializing Predator, the spyware, and representatives of the state. So, and not only there has been lack of justice, but actually the investigation in Greece suffered attempts of sabotage. And I'm talking here about the transfer of the file to a politically appointed prosecutor at the Supreme Court at the time when the former prosecutor in charge was preparing to compare the spyware and the EYP target lists. So EYP is the National Intelligence Service, which would show, which would bring evidence about this spyware being used by the state. Moreover, little political accountability and legal changes were enforced to provide guarantees against arbitrary surveillance. And finally, the members of the only institution which was doing its job, thanks to its president, Christos Ramos, ADAE, which is an institution in charge of the protection of privacy in communications, were threatened with prosecution. So what we demand is that the EU must act as the national authorities in Greece are failing to do so. First, the European Commission should take due account of the lack of progress in the next Rule of Law report on Greece and in the light of the new European Media Freedom Act. Second, the European Parliament should create, after the elections, a PEGA 2 committee to follow up on the work of PEGA 1. Third, Europol, the agency for the cooperation of national police forces, should propose to the national authorities its assistance in the investigation. Unfortunately, the national authorities have to agree to that before the actual assistance of Europol can take place. And this assistance and oversight by the EU has three objectives. The first is urgently bring justice for the illegal surveillance in a transparent and independent procedure. Second objective, effectively protect journalists and the confidentiality of sources against arbitrary espionage. And the third objective of this EU action on the national authorities is to duly reinforce accountability, independence, and transparency in the decision-making and oversight of surveillance in Greece. And if the national authorities in Greece don't comply quickly, we should discuss the next stage. And the discussion on the possible suspension of EU funds on Greece due to rule of law issues must not be a taboo. I will finish by saying that the last rank of Greece in the World Press Freedom Index, so 107th place in the European Union, is an issue for Greece and for the EU, and it's a responsibility of both the national and EU authorities to bring remedy. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavol, and thank you for making those recommendations. Just a quick note to say that, yeah, all of the findings and the recommendations are within the report, which has just been shared in the chat, and a number of our organizations will be publishing afterwards. Pavol, you made some excellent points, and I think there's this crazy paradox where rather than any accountability for spyware against journalists in Greece. Journalists have been sued for making those revelations. It's flipped on its head, and yeah, posing serious issues for press freedom. You mentioned the big news about the case involving Thanasis Koukakis. I'm not sure if he's joined as a participant, but if he is, please, we can bring him into the webinar if you'd like to say a few words. But yeah, these issues obviously pose a huge threat to the digital safety of journalists, but the physical safety of reporters and media workers in Greece has been an issue for many years as well. So I'll pass now over to Attila Mong from CPJ, who will talk a little bit about the threats from posing to journalists for their physical safety. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for inviting us. It was really a great honor for us to be part of this mission. And when it comes to journalists' physical safety, the picture is also very gloomy. And when I finish my little speech, I think you can easily draw parallel from what Pavol said. So, of course, these issues are very much related, like cybersecurity and physical security. So when it comes to journalist safety, we can say that almost no other European countries has such a high level or high number of physical attacks, which endanger the safety of journalists. We have to note that there is no comprehensive official statistics. Greece doesn't produce such statistics, although it was one of the conclusions of our report that Greece should make definitely more efforts to create such data. But we see an increased number of cases on the Council of Europe platform, so alerts and alerts on physical attacks. But besides the statistics, it's just as important how journalists in Greece perceive their own security. So we know when journalists fear for their safety, that has a clear implication, clear effect on independent and critical reporting, and definitely it increases the chilling effect. So journalists we interviewed during the mission spoke of a deteriorating situation of increasing threats and attacks in the last few years. So these attacks take, of course, many forms. We see that there are continued arson attacks against media outlets, sometimes even journalists' home. This is a pattern which I would say Greece has shown for the last 5-7 years, which at least I'm involved in covering Greece. We covered several attacks, and in most of these cases, there is no accountability. So the authorities don't do enough to investigate these cases. And of course, reporters covering protests and demonstrations, especially photojournalists, are exposed to partly violence from protesters, but also these journalists feel that the police fail to protect them sufficiently against hostile protesters, and what's more, even hinder their reporting, because in certain cases they don't differentiate them between protesters and journalists, and then they detain them. And in some cases they are deliberately, at least that's what they feel, they are deliberately targeted by police. Journalists who cover specific topics, like Pavol mentioned, migration, organized crime, migration, refugees issues, organized crime, and corruption are specifically vulnerable. There are a lot of threats, online, offline, and in some cases attacks, which are again not properly investigated. When it comes to migration and refugee reporting, this is also a pattern which we see in Greece. We have to know that overall there has been less cases involving journalists from Greece covering refugees, Greece and Greek islands, and migration topics. But the major concern still remains among journalists that Greek authorities don't impede their work in many cases when it comes to their access to refugee camps or covering these issues. Sometimes they face very hostile, so partly they hinder their work, and when it comes to field work, they face a very hostile approach from authorities. And Greece is not exceptional in that sense that there is a lot of online abuse, and not exceptional in the sense that it happens in many other European countries as well. There's a lot of online abuse, and the sad fact is, as very often politicians and public officials start these campaigns, and then members, like with rhetoric, hostile rhetoric and smear campaigns, and then members of the public feel encouraged, and then these lead to waves of attacks. So just two main takeaways from our kind of coverage and research. First, for many journalists, especially journalists covering certain topics, it's a daily threat. It's a daily part of their everyday work, unfortunately, that they feel threatened. And we are speaking here of an EU member country. So when I say the state fails to provide an overall sense of security for journalists, I think that's a very sad statement for a European member state. And another takeaway is very strongly related that these cases are not properly investigated. There is a high level of impunity, and it contributes to this sense of unsafe environment for journalists. And I would just highlight two main recommendations. First of all, we recommend, or we ask that the prosecutor of the Supreme Court should commission an independent evaluation of these unresolved cases of attacks against journalists, including cases of police violence. And this investigation should be transparent, and the conclusions should be publicized. And also the prosecutor of the Supreme Court could take a leading role in regularly informing the public about these investigations, because transparency and more information will contribute to like a restored faith in the commitment of the authorities to maintaining the safety of journalists. So I would pause here. I think I already spoke 5 minutes. Of course, we will have time in the end to maybe elaborate more on certain issues I mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Attila. And yeah, again, if you do have specific questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A just at the bottom. Yeah, during the mission, as Attila said, we looked at this issue closely and met with a number of journalists who'd faced physical attacks themselves, and they really feel that sense of insecurity. Attila, you mentioned impunity there. Obviously, we cannot talk about impunity unless we discuss the case of Giorgos Karaivaz as well. So Jasmijn, I'll pass to you. I know your organization, in cooperation with CPJ and RSF, has been looking into this case very closely. So what was the conclusions of the reports on that specific case?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie, indeed. And also thanks for the participation in this mission and this webinar. Indeed, as Attila already mentioned, safety of journalists and attacks on journalists have a huge impact, not only on the access to information of Greek citizens, but also on other journalists who are discouraged to continue reporting. And among this effect, impunity is one of the strongest deterrors of free press. And particularly the murder of Giorgos Karaivaz has indeed had, as we noticed in our mission as well, a major impact. And not only the fact that this murder took place, but also the fact that 2 years later, we are still waiting for convictions for the murder. And ahead of our mission, of course, we recognized the 2 arrests in April of 2 of the people who collaborated on the execution of the murder, regretting that the announcement was made in the eve of the elections on the personal Facebook page of the minister. But while this is a positive development, we really went to Greece in our mission also with this question of what are the authorities planning to do to expedite not only this investigation, but also the investigation of the other murder of a journalist in Greece. Greece is the only country in Europe, in the European Union, with 2 unresolved journalist murders. Indeed, CPJ, RSF, and FPU brought out a report this year on the murder of Socrates Joyas. And if you compare the 2 cases, you see clear patterns around impunity and a lack of consistent investigation of attacks on journalists. And during our mission, we found in our conversations with government authorities, firstly, that a clear protocol for the investigation of crimes against journalists is lacking. Specific issues that should be investigated in these cases are not being addressed consistently throughout the police and the prosecution. There's indeed, as Attila mentioned, a lack of independent evaluation of these cases. The office of the prosecutor of the Supreme Court remains politically appointed, and also there's no intention at either of these responsible ministries to start such an evaluation. There's no data. While in all the conversations with Greek journalists, we consistently hear back if something happens to me, if I get physically attacked, for example, the police rarely follows up, nobody gets convicted. So we have strong indications that indeed full impunity is nearly always the case, and particularly for these 2 murders. And we were also shocked by the lack of a serious approach to addressing this issue. So there was firstly a denial of this issue of impunity, and secondly, a lack of concrete timeline and concrete plans. And among this, we also want to highlight the task force on the safety of journalists, which is a collaboration between several ministries, the journalist unions, and actors from academia. We are positive that this has been established. It's a response to rule of law reports from the European Commission. And this is important collaboration. Having all these actors at the same table has proven effective in many member states. However, we find also during our mission, and we will write about this in our report as well, that the task force is very unknown among Greek media and lacks concrete ambitions and a concrete timeline. It lacks resources. It did not have concrete plans on a lot of the issues we talk about today, and in particular also impunity. We've written about this as well in a joint submission for the upcoming rule of law reports, and we will also continue to bring this under the attention in Brussels.
Thank you, Jasmijn. Yeah, it's good to mention that submission to the rule of law report. And we met the family of Giorgos Karaivaz when we were in Athens, and continue to support them until the state fulfills its responsibility to bring justice in this case, and to provide clarity, I think, in the long term about the motive behind it as well. We've touched on the topic of the safety of journalists there. We have another external journalist who I think is joined us now, Marina Rafenberg, who's the correspondent for Le Monde and AFP in Greece. Marina, if you can hear us, if you could turn on your mic and your video, then it'd be great to hear from you now about the challenges that journalists face reporting on the issue of refugees and migrants. If not, then when you get the system working, we can come back to you in a little while. Okay, then in that case, thank you, Jasmijn, for that intervention. Yeah, that's one of the most serious topics there is to discuss when talking about press freedom in Greece. Another topical issue right now is the legal threats and slaps. Thodoris, we'll come to you just after, in a moment, to give a personal kind of first-hand intervention on how big an issue that is. But Massimo, this was an issue we assessed in the mission, and it has a dedicated chapter in the report. So what were the main conclusions and findings on that topic? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jamie, and good morning and welcome to everybody, and thanks for attending this webinar today. I mean, we dealt with the issue of slaps and other forms of legal pressure on journalists, and a very succinct conclusion is that the response so far has been very limited, and much more needs to be done. We met with a number of cases in during our mission, and we continue to meet and to come across cases even after the mission. We met, for instance, with a journalist from Alteres who are being sued for reporting a first instance conviction, journalists from Demokratia who are being sued for hundreds of thousands of euros by businessmen. We met the colleagues who are here with us today, Thodoris from Reporters United, who were like where the lawsuit came as a sort of like follow-up to the Predator spyware scandal by the nephew of the Prime Minister. And we all know that there was a case in court a few days ago, and the new lawsuit was started a few days ago. Besides slaps, besides the lawsuits against public participation, we also came across a number of legal pressures that have been put on journalists through other means, like the criminal lawsuits that were brought against the Documento in 2022, or the more recent ones. And in this scenario, not even foreign journalists are spared, because we knew across the case of French-Canadian journalist Romain Chauvet, who was sentenced to a 6-month suspended sentence for spreading fake news, and this was based on very flimsy evidence. This happened after our mission, but it's also another point of concern. Now, what's the impact of these legal actions taken against journalists? The impact is basically that time and resources of the journalist and physical energies and psychological energies are spent into defending journalists in court. In the end, what we have seen is that not many SLAPs are successful. I would say the majority of them are rejected or the fines are being very lenient, but it is the impact on resources of journalists that is really problematic, and this can create the so-called chilling effect. In the case of NGOs, for instance, where a media outlet is a part of NGO, this can also force NGOs to change their own internal structure, so adding more and more costs to the process. So yeah, I think there is a bit of noise in the background. What we're seeing is that while the big journals, the big media outlets have a significant firepower, as I said, and they can counter this, the impact of SLAPs and legal threats is more felt more on independent media and also on smaller media, the ones that are like freelance, and this is really has a disproportionate impact. So that in the end we could witness a sort of like a reduction of pluralism of media in Greece, and at the same time a sort of like stifling the independent and investigative journalism. So this is another concern. A response of the state. The response really said failed to materialize. Jasmijn just mentioned the task force that was created, and within the task force there is an observatory on SLAPs that has been just created, and there is a possibility of following up on that. But I would say it's too little so far done by the government, and much more needs to be done in this regard. The 2022 recommendation on SLAPs have not been, the measures have not been implemented. So there is no free legal aid for journalists that we know. There is no sort of like psychological support. There is no award of damages in the case of SLAPs. And also there is no possibility for an early dismissal of lawsuits. So there is much more that needs to be done by the government in this regard. And concretely, I mean, the government should take up its responsibility to respect and protect the journalists in this regard. Concretely, our recommendations in this point are, from point of view of legal amendments, we recommend the government to take into account the impact on freedom of information, freedom of expression that legal amendments can have, and in particular we are referring to the possibility of removing suspended sentences for cases of defamation that should remain in place. And then on SLAPs, first and very simple would be to show restraint. Politicians, members of the government, should be aware of the impact that SLAPs have on journalists and should show restraint not to start them. This would be very easy and would be a clear commitment by the government to stop this phenomenon. Second, the government should follow up and implement the measures suggested by the European Commission in its 2022 recommendation, and so put in place the measures outlined there. And third, the government should engage with the journalists, should give publicity and let them know of the existence of the task force and promote its activities in this regard, and engage in a dialogue also to share with the journalists the feedback and the follow-up that on the report that on the 2022 recommendation. So these are the 4 measures that it would recommend for the government. Thank you.
Thanks, Massimo. I think we'll come back to the issue of SLAPs in just a second. We have a request to speak from Andreas Panagopoul from the Pan-Hellenic Federation of Journalists as well. I know they've been documenting SLAPs, but just while we have Marina Rafenberg here, thank you for joining us. And
yes,
yeah, I know you're at a press conference right now, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. So I don't know if the sound is really good because as you said, I'm in a press conference, but I just want to mention a bit the kind of pressure we have as correspondents in Greece. And actually, it can be different kind of pressure. Sometimes it's a bit indirect pressure, like it means we have the feeling that that the government is really taking care of seeing what we publish. And so we can have calls from ministers or from people from the Prime Minister cabinet, and they just mention you that they look at your work and that they are not really happy with what you published. So this is kind of indirect pressure. And after we have like also difficulties to report on some issues like the migration issue. Like every time we try to have access to the camps, we try to have access to the Evros border near Turkey. We face like really big problems. Like we don't have authorization first. And we also face like problems with the police or with the army. Like every time I've been in Evros, for example, I've been harassed by the police, you know, just by doing my work. So this kind of pressure is like, it is really a problem for our work. And especially on the migration issue, this is a big problem because we don't have access to some places. And also, I just want to add something. It's like there is not a big culture of the press freedom in Greece. And it means like the pressure don't come only from the government, but from different kind of people. And for example, it's really usual for me that people ask me to read my piece before I publish it. And I'm not used to this in France, you know. So it's because they don't have confidence in the media, you know. They don't have confidence in the media, and I think they are used to do this with Greek journalists. So they often ask me, can we read your paper before it's published? And I tell them, no, it's not possible, you know. And yeah, I want to say this because actually I think the pressure don't come only from government, but it happens also that some entrepreneur or some people from this, even from the civil society, ask me this kind of things, you know. So basically, I think it's a bit also about the education on press freedom and education on the media in Greece that is not really well done, you know. That's all.
Thanks, Marina. We appreciate you joining us from the press conference, and yeah, thanks for sharing those views. I think that's something we heard from a lot of journalists working in Greece, both Greek journalists and foreign media as well. And it seems like this issue of reporting on migration, it's a really cross-cutting issue because journalists have faced legal threats for reporting on this, but also surveillance as well. We know Stavros Malechoudis was surveilled for reporting on a child in a refugee camp. So I think there's a variety of challenges that journalists reporting on that issue face. Andreas, we'll come to you in a second, but just for now, Thodoris, you have very recent first-hand experience of these challenges. You were in court last week, fighting with colleagues, obviously, with EFSIN and Athanasis Koukakis, fighting a major SLAP case, which has been recognized as such by our organizations and many other press freedom organizations around the world. How did it go in the court, and what are the next steps to look for? Thanks.
Yes, hi from me, and I would like first of all to really thank you for this invitation as a reporter from Reporters United, and I would really like to thank all of you as you have supported us in many ways regarding this SLAP case. So in order to be very, very quick, first of all, in summer 2022, we published 2 stories regarding the surveillance scandal and the connections of the Greek former, then he was the General Secretary of the Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Dimitriadis, also the nephew of the Greek Prime Minister. The day he resigned, he launched the first lawsuit against Reporters United. I've seen my colleague Nicholas Leodopoulos, with whom we are doing the investigation, and Thanasis Koukakis for tweeting the story. We went on with the investigation, and the first instance hearing of this lawsuit was ended in last Thursday. The process is very specific. We submitted a multiple-page legal note, a legal text with all the evidence, accompanied with all the evidence and documents that prove the rightness, the fact that our story was right and precise. We feel very confident for this investigation. Apart from that, we had two important witnesses during the hearing. The one is our colleague, our dear colleague, Tassos Teloglu from Instant Story, who has been investigating the scandal along with Elisa Triantafylou, another very good colleague at Inside Story. He brought more connections between Mr. Dimitriadis, Intelexa, the company that trades Predator from Greece, between Felix Pigios, the shareholder, the ex-shareholder, former deputy administrator of Intelexa in Athens, and another businessman involved in the scandal called Yannis Lavranos. And we had also another witness, one of the most important and prominent professors of constitutional law in Athens, Mr. Professor Nikos Alivizatos. And now the process in the next 5 days, we are going to submit the last legal note regarding this first instance hearing, with which we were going to respond to what the witness of Mr. Dimitriadis said during the court, a lawyer that works for him in his office, and to submit our answers, our reactions to what the legal note of Mr. Dimitriadis said that he submitted during the hearing. We are very happy with what has been done so far, because we truly believe we brought even more connections and even more evidence regarding the connection of Mr. Dimitriadis into the Predator Gate scandal. So this process, in a way, was an opportunity to talk more about his involvement into that case. And now we're waiting, of course, for the decision, which is expected between 6 to 9 months. The decision is not made public immediately. We don't know. The three judges will work on that, and they will have their decision in the next 6 to 9 months. We respect this whole process, and now it's their turn to decide what we have done and what Mr. Dimitriadis has done. I would like only to point out that, unfortunately, what we have seen is that the only cases regarding the Predator Gate scandal in Greece over the last 2 years is the legal cases against journalists, and this penal case, a criminal case against the members of the Independent Authority of Privacy that investigated this scandal. This, I think, poses some questions regarding the rule of law in Greece. There is no person have been called by the Greek judiciary in order to give explanations about the use of Predator, which was totally illegal in Greece in the time of use against Greek politicians, against journalists, their sources, of course, as was mentioned before, and members of the Greek government. So that's it. That's why we're waiting. And the second slap case that Mr. Dimitriadis launched against us, again for another story we published on the Predator Gate scandal, is expected to go to hearing, if there is no postponement, in December 2024. Let me know if you need any information, so I want to be very quick.
Thanks, Thodoris. Yeah. I mean, we look at this case, your case, obviously, in the report, and
thank you so much for that. Really,
you and your journalists and your partners deserve so much credit for this vital investigative reporting. It's been so important and I think worthy of awards for journalistic practice. So both for your case and the separate case at the European Court of Human Rights of Thanasis Koukakis, we will continue to support those all the way, I'm sure. So we appreciate your work on this, really. I would like to invite onto the virtual stage Andreas Panagopoul from the Pan-Hellenic Federation of Journalists. If his mic and video are working, they've set up a directory or a new monitoring platform for slaps and legal threats in Greece. We met during the mission in Athens. So if his video equipment is working, we can hear you. We can't see you.
You cannot. Okay, give me a second.
Okay. I think we just have your mic available right now, but please, some of your thoughts on. I'm not sure why it's not working, but we can hear you fine.
Okay, because I have my camera on, but okay. What I would like to add on what Thodoris and Massimo mentioned, it's not the observatory or the we've made in the Pan-Hellenic Federation of Journalists, which is in premature stage, and we're trying to communicate the observatory in order to help colleagues when they are facing slaps. But there is two issues, and I would like to add to what Thodoris said, is that Mr. Dimitriadis is penalizing everyone who is writing something or publishing something against him for the issue of the surveillance. The Federation and the Union are next to our colleagues, and we are going to the courts with them, or we publish announcements, etc. The positive thing is that a few media outlets are publishing what's happening against the journalists in their television stations and their digital or print publishes. And the second thing is that, as I mentioned, Dimitriadis, when someone is writing something against him, or because Thodoris made a good research or whatever, is showing everybody. There are many cases here in Greece against many other media, and the reason I wanted to take the stage for a while is that yesterday we had another slap, 52 million euros against 52 million euros against a colleague of ours. His name is George Papachristos, and it was made by an entrepreneur because Papachristos mentioned that the previous years he was trying to build a channel, a TV channel, with money for Russia, etc., etc. But it is 52 million euros yesterday. This is incredible. And the slaps issue is a plug for Greece. And we are trying to press the Ministry of Justice, the government, the task force. I'm the representative of the PFGU in the task force, and we discuss it. And we have a meeting on Thursday, and this is it. I mean, nobody can work, huh? 52 million euros.
Okay, yeah, that's most definitely the.
I mean, Dimitriadis made a case against, I think, Alter Ego Media. It was 3.5 million euros, etc., etc., and many other media outlets. So I think that there are many issues we have to focus on, and we have to cooperate. And this is the second reason I was in the stage, and I would like to ask you to find ways to cooperate in order to protect freedom of journalists and of press in Greece. Thank you so much. Sorry for your time.
Thank you, Andreas. And yeah, definitely the first we've heard of that lawsuit. I'm can't confirm, but if it is indeed 52 million, that might be a record slap in Europe. Absolutely, I've never heard of something that high. We're used to multi-million euro lawsuits, but that would be shockingly high. So we'll make sure to follow up. And yeah, we look forward to working with your organization on the observatory for slaps as well. So just yeah, please again, if you have questions for individual panelists, feel free to put them into the Q&A. There was a final thematic chapter that we looked at in the report, which I'll quickly run over here, and then I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. And that was really looking at the kind of systemic issues around media pluralism and independent journalism in Greece. Yesterday, IPI published a report on media capture in Greece, written by Danae Maragoudaki from Solomon, an excellently researched and written report. I'll share that in the chat. So I don't want to go too much into details here. I really encourage you to read that report. But I think, yeah, its main findings were that, you know, under all of these issues that my colleagues have described so far, Greece's media ecosystem really continues to suffer from these long-term and systemic challenges. Many can be traced to the financial crisis, which really weakened the media market, deepened what she writes as the toxic entanglement of the fourth estate in Greece with vested political and business interests. And we have this strange situation while the Greek media ecosystem appears vibrant and is densely populated, particularly in online sphere, political polarization is really deeply ingrained, and real media pluralism is weak, despite the large number of media outlets. News reporting that damages the message control of the government, including on topics that have been mentioned so far, such as surveillance, migration, are really absent within the mainstream media market, particularly television. Many of the major print media outlets are owned by familial dynasties and business owners, many of whom are active in the country's very, very lucrative shipping industry, and many of whom also have political connections. So it's these kind of relationships between media owners and political and financial elites that really expose their media to potential conflicts of interest. We met with a number of journalists who work in the bigger legacy print media while we were in Greece, well, at least one or two. And yeah, media ownership was raised as, quote, the elephant in the room when discussing media freedom in Greece. So this report that we published really delves into that issue, maps out ownership and the connections between them. And although direct acts of censorship are understood to be rare within newsrooms, self-censorship amongst the journalistic community is understood to be pervasive. That said, at the systemic level, there have been some positive changes recently, which I think we should recognize, and those involve the creation of new registries for print media and electronic media, which try to kind of increase transparency over ownership as well as flows of advertising money. In 2022, the government did pass a new law establishing rules for the distribution of state advertising to make it more transparent and fair. And this was seen as a response to the so-called PETSAS list scandal back in 2022, where money was allocated to media in a very, very discriminatory way. But I think all of these different issues really contribute to an issue of trust in media, which was mentioned earlier. But I think it's important to stress that Greece, of all EU member states, has the lowest trust of public in its journalism, in its media, according to the recent Reuters Digital News Report study. And that poses serious issues for Greek democracy, for public debate, and yeah, for watchdog journalism. And it really, I think, makes it even more challenging to fight for journalists, for press freedom in Greece, because that trust is so low. So overall, I think Greece has some incredible investigative journalists doing work on a daily basis and doing really, really award-winning investigative journalism. The issue is it's just so squeezed to the fringes. It lacks readers, it lacks impact. Many of the major media just don't pick up these bombshell stories, so it's not kind of filtered as it should be through the media ecosystem. Essentially, watchdog reporting is lacking within the country. So I think, yeah, please, if you have questions, we can move to Q&A. Maybe just a few concluding remarks, just to kind of sum up what we've heard from everybody so far. And the conclusions that our report finds really is that all of these themes that we've identified in the report around safety, impunity, surveillance, spyware, media pluralism, SLAPs as well, on their own, each of them would pose a serious and alarming challenge to the Greek media ecosystem. But when you look at the picture together in Greece, I think they contribute to a really alarming state of press freedom. And while it's essential to mention that the Greek government has made some positive and well-meaning reforms, these are so far kind of limited in scope and not reflective of the severity of the crisis. That was one of our key conclusions. Andreas, just to answer your question, the report is published just after this webinar, and we'll share it and send it around to just answer your question. So in some areas, reforms have been made, and we note those very clearly and positively and welcome them in the report. But on other key issues, no action has been taken. And as regards the surveillance of journalists in Greece, the Greek state remains the principal source of the threat. So our mission kind of concludes that unlike other EU countries, Greece, the Greek government has demonstrated some willingness to take steps for positive reform and to remedy the situation in some areas. And the same certainly cannot be said for other EU member states. However, the measures are limited in scope and need to be strengthened much further. The recommendations we've outlined in the report, I hope, will be taken and listened and assessed. And we hope that the report really helps contribute to what's needed, which is a debate around press freedom in Greece. So I'm sure all of our organizations intend to work closely with the European Union, report our findings to the European Commission. I think there's a planned visit to Thessaloniki happening later this year, potentially in February, that I'm sure a number of us will be there. So I really see this report as, not the end of our mission, but as a middle point. And we intend to use the findings and the conclusions and the recommendations moving forward to push for reform. So I'll end it there for now. If there's questions, please do. I have one question here from someone who's anonymous. What is the recommended call to action for members of the public in Greece? Aside from sharing the articles that resulted in slaps and subscribing to independent newspapers, how do you want us to show support? Thodoris, it's kind of directed at a Greek journalist himself. Maybe you can take that one.
Yes, that's a great question. To be honest, these two things are already big enough. So what the main problem we're having, one of the main problems we are facing in Greece is the resources, so the budget, because we're small, all of us are small teams, let's say, that we're facing also this kind of slaps. So, subscribing to the platforms you like Reporters United or Solomon or Inside Story, and then trying to convince a friend that it's better for you to pay for a story instead of having only powerful business people or the government funding with state money. This an investigation is already a lot, and sharing and talking about that. So because in that way we will be able to have more people into the newsrooms working for, and so if you have more people into the newsrooms, then the impact of a slap will not be how can I say that, so felt into the newsroom. For example, to be honest with you, over the last 2 months, me and my colleagues that reported on the surveillance scandal, we have been working almost exclusively on the documents, on the preparation for the hearing the previous week. So we stopped working as journalists, and we were like, journalists working for lawyers, which is not the thing that we should do, because we didn't report on some guys during this period of time. So I think these two, the raising awareness is already enough, because during this process, the psychological side is not only that we want to win to court when you are in good faith. And now I was feeling that with this case, but also in previous cases that we won, is our effort to show to the public, to you also, that we're in good faith. When you have a slap, it's not only the court that may put you into question, or your friends, the audience, organizations. So these two things are already enough, and we have in a way to try to convince people that they should give €1, €2, whatever they can, in order to fund this kind of teams. That would be already a huge change, because we don't have a subscription mentality in Greece, and it's very difficult to convince people, because they don't trust media. So talking with your friends and from one mouth to another makes a big difference.
Thanks, Thodoris. And yeah, there's another question here in the chat, which asks if there is a legal fund that people can donate to that goes towards the legal aid of journalists in Greece.
Is this for me too?
Whoever.
From my side, I don't want to monopolize. Just a very quick note. I don't think there is one fund so far, but it would be a good reaction if you see that there are slaps against media and journalists you trust. If you can support them more, that would be of great importance. Because, for example, we were very lucky that thanks to your organizations, we had the opportunity to fund this, all the legal process, but it takes a lot of time even from the life of journalists. So there is a way also. So there is an impact even when you have no, let's say, legal fees, because you spend time into that instead of you don't have a reporter writing stories, you have a reporter writing legal notes for the court. So because you have to help, you give a lot of time to help the lawyers, because lawyers can help you if you help them. So that would be amazing if you can support, or maybe that's a good idea, a common fund. That's good.
One of our recommendations maybe to follow up on. And yeah, just to say as well that the Media Freedom Rapid Response, which is a project which a number of our organizations are part of, also has a dedicated legal support fund. It's for use for journalists and media outlets across Europe. But yeah, we've used quite a large amount of that money in Greece to try and defend journalists in the last few years. A number of the cases Massimo mentioned, Athens in Thessaloniki, others in Athens, it's been used there. And Reporters Without Borders as well does have another fund that I know about. But yeah, a fund at the domestic level is potentially something to look at moving forward. Massimo.
Yeah, you already answered my point, Jamie. Exactly. That would be, the fund at domestic level, probably to be replenished from abroad if necessary, would be something also that would also have a deterrent effect on the other SLAP initiatives, because, if they know that the journalists are better protected, I mean, this could be a way for discourage people from starting these frivolous lawsuits. Thank you.
Thanks, Massimo. If there aren't any other questions, then again, I please encourage everyone to read the report. We'll send it round to all the participants afterwards, and it'll be published on our websites, I'm sure, as well, and social medias. So we've almost hit the hour mark on time for once. So I think unless there's any last questions, then I will just take a second to thank all the panelists, Attila Mong, Jasmijn de Zeeuw, Massimo Morratti, Pavol Szalai, and Thodoris. Again, thank you very much for joining us, as well as Marina for joining us from the press conference earlier. All of our organizations have worked so much on Greece in the last 2 years, and that attention is not going anywhere. I think Thodoris will be standing by you and all of the media outlets targeted in the SLAP. And we appreciate all those and the questions of people asking how to support Greek media, because I think any changes in the country will require cooperation between journalists, between the media outlets themselves, between the unions and them working together, as well as cooperation with state bodies as well. That's what we hope for. So thank you very much again, all, and enjoy the rest of the day.